If you grew up in the 1970s, there are things your parents did every single day that would get them investigated, fined, or arrested today. And here's what's strange: nobody around them blinked. No one called it neglect. No one called it reckless. No one called anyone. They weren't bad parents. They weren't careless parents. They were just raising children inside a world that hadn't yet decided what danger looked like or who was responsible for it. This isn't a story about how parents back then were worse. It's a story about how normal risk used to feel and how much the rules have changed since. Letting kids ride bikes all day with no idea where they were. The door opened in the morning and the kids disappeared. That was the plan. That was the whole plan. No GPS, no check and call at noon, no walkie-talkie clipped to a belt loop. You left and you came back when you were hungry or when the streetlights came on, whichever came first. Parents didn't pace the kitchen wondering which street their child had wandered down. They assumed the kids were fine because kids always came back, and the neighborhood was full of people who knew whose kid belonged to whom. The woman 3 houses down would yell at your child if she saw him doing something stupid, and nobody thought that was strange. It was a distributed parenting system with no app, no notification, and no liability waiver. The whole block was watching, even when it didn't look like anyone was watching. Today, a 10-year-old riding a bike alone 2 streets over will earn a neighbor a difficult phone call. Was it freedom? Or was it just that no one had invented the word unsupervised as an accusation yet? Letting kids play outside until dark with no check-ins. The rule was one rule, and it was understood without being spoken. Be home when the streetlights come on. Not before. Not after a phone call. When the lights come on. That was the entire framework. Between breakfast and dusk, a child's location was his own business. He could be 3 blocks away, 2 neighborhoods over, in someone's backyard, in a ditch catching frogs. Nobody knew, and nobody needed to know, because the system worked. Every mother on the street had implicitly agreed to the same contract. Every child on the street knew the same curfew. If your kid did something reckless in front of someone else's house, that adult corrected him, and your kid came home and didn't mention it. And that was community. That was how children were raised by a whole place instead of just 2 people. Today, not knowing where your child is for 3 hours in the afternoon can trigger a call to Child Protective Services. The streetlight wasn't just a curfew. It was a contract between parents, between neighbors, between a whole generation, and the assumption that the world was basically safe. That contract has expired. Hitchhiking. If you didn't have a car, or the car wasn't available, you stood at the side of the road and held out your thumb, and eventually someone stopped. You thanked them, got out at your destination, and that was a normal Tuesday afternoon in 1974. Parents told their teenagers, if you miss the bus, stick your thumb out. Someone will stop, and someone usually did. The man who pulled over was a neighbor, a coworker from the plant, or just someone heading the same direction with an empty seat. The whole system ran on a simple assumption that the stranger in the pickup was not a threat, but a resource. Teenagers hitchhiked to the next town. College kids hitchhiked home for Thanksgiving with a duffel bag and $5. Adults hitched to work when the car was in the shop, and nobody thought less of them for it. It was practical. It was normal. In some families, it was quietly considered a life skill, learning to read a stranger's face, knowing which car to wave past and which one to get into. Today, nobody teaches that skill. Nobody offers that ride. The roads look the same. The distance between towns hasn't changed. But somewhere between then and now, the stranger in the pickup stopped being a neighbor and started being a risk. Freedom and danger wore the same face back then. Most people got where they were going just fine. And the ones who didn't, well, some stories a town keeps to itself, because the alternative is admitting the system had a price. Gifting kids genuinely dangerous toys with no supervision. Under the Christmas tree in 1973, You might find a chemistry set with real acids and real reactions and a pamphlet that assumed you were a small adult who could follow instructions without injuring yourself. You might find a BB gun in a long box, the kind your father had when he was 8, the kind his father had before that. A tradition wrapped in tissue paper and handed to a child who had been told to be careful and was trusted to be. You might find a set of lawn darts, the heavy metal kind with pointed ends, sold with a diagram showing 2 families playing on opposite sides of the yard, as though this were no more dangerous than croquet. Parents bought these things proudly. The chemistry set meant their son might be a scientist. The BB gun meant their boy was growing up. There were no age restrictions on the box. There were no warnings beyond the ones that assumed basic human judgment would handle the rest. Today, a BB gun under the tree for an 8-year-old generates phone calls. Was it trust in their children, or trust in a world that was more forgiving of mistakes? Perhaps both. Perhaps neither survived the decade intact. Using the TV as a full-time babysitter. On Saturday morning, the television came on at 6, and the children arranged themselves in front of it in whatever formation was comfortable, on the floor, draped across the couch, lying on their stomachs with their chins in their hands. And they stayed there until noon or 1, or whenever someone got hungry enough to move. Nobody set a timer. Nobody came in at the 90-minute mark and said it was time to go outside. The cartoons ran, and the commercials ran, and the cartoons ran again. And the house was quiet, and the parents had time to drink coffee and read the paper and exist as adults for a few hours. And everyone agreed this was fine. The TV was not a danger. The TV was a gift. Later came the commercials for sugar cereals and plastic toys and candy aimed directly at the children watching, designed to make them want things, calibrated to the attention span of a 7-year-old. Nobody regulated that either, not in any meaningful way. Today, the American Academy of Pediatrics has screen time guidelines. Parents who let their toddler watch too much television are quietly judged at playgroups. We traded the TV babysitter for the iPad babysitter. The screen got smaller. The guilt got bigger. Did anything actually change? The legacy of traditional discipline. In many households of that era, strict discipline was a foundational element of family life. Whether it was a traditional wooden utensil from the kitchen drawer or another familiar household item, certain objects stood as clear symbols of parental authority. When a boundary was crossed, correction was immediate, and within the context of the times, this was viewed not as harshness, but as essential guidance. Parents who maintained these strict standards were seen as deeply committed to raising respectful children. The line between discipline and overreaching had a very different definition back then, and most families operated well within the accepted norms of their community. The familiar phrase, "This hurts me more than it hurts you," was spoken with genuine sincerity by parents who believed they were doing what was best. This approach was quietly reinforced by schools, community institutions, and the culture at large. Yet, there is a profound complexity to this history that doesn't fit into a simple category. Many who grew up under this strict traditional system grew to love and respect their parents deeply, holding no resentment. That emotional reality is genuine and forms a significant part of that generation's story. An entire era of children was raised with these strict boundaries, leaving a diverse and lasting impact on how they view the past today. Letting kids sit on a parent's lap while driving. It usually started with asking, "Can I steer?" And sometimes the answer was yes, and the child climbed up into the lap of their father and put small hands on the bottom of the wheel. And for a few seconds on a quiet road, the whole world felt enormous and possible. There was no car seat. There was no seatbelt for anyone. There was just the warmth of a parent behind you, the vibration of the road coming up through the seat, and the feeling of being trusted with something real. Millions of Americans carry this memory. It lives in the same drawer as the smell of Old Spice and the sound of a baseball game on AM radio. And it was also this: no airbag, no harness, no barrier at all between a small body and the windshield if the car stopped suddenly. The physics were always there. The danger was always there. Nobody named it. Ask anyone who remembers sitting in their father's lap behind the wheel. They'll smile before they finish the sentence. The question is, should they? Feeding kids whatever was bright, sweet, and came in a box. Breakfast in 1974 was a bowl of something that turned the milk a different color. Tang for the orange juice because astronauts drank it, and that was good enough. Kool-Aid in a pitcher in the refrigerator, mixed with enough sugar that the spoon stood up by itself. A bologna sandwich on white bread with a Twinkie and a bag of chips in the lunchbox. But not as a treat, as the standard. Nobody read the nutrition label because the nutrition label barely existed. Nobody knew what a trans fat was. The food dyes. Red no. 40, yellow no 5, blue no. 1 showed up in everything from cereal to birthday cake to the coating on certain pills, and the colors were cheerful, and the children were happy, and that felt like enough information. Parents fed their children what their children would eat, and what their children would eat was whatever was sweet and cheap and required no argument at the table. Some of those dyes are now banned in the European Union. Some are still being litigated in the United States. They fed their children joy. It just came with a side of red dye no 40. The changing norms of the parking lot. Back then, it wasn't a complex decision, it was simply a common routine of daily life. When a parent needed to run into the bank, pick up a prescription, or step into a salon for a brief appointment, the children often waited in the car. The windows were cracked open, the radio kept playing, and the oldest child was naturally left in charge of the group. Everyone waited patiently in the driveway, passing the time until their parents returned, and life moved on without a second thought. This happened outside grocery stores, hardware shops, and local businesses everywhere, places where quick errands were easier handled alone. Today, that exact same everyday scene from the 80s is viewed through a completely different lens. What was once considered a normal, routine stop is now judged by modern standards of supervision, and a simple errand could quickly turn into a serious legal inquiry. Smoking in the car with the kids inside. The window was down, maybe halfway. That was the ventilation system. Dad lit up somewhere around the on-ramp, and the smoke drifted back through the station wagon for the next 4 hours, past the youngest one asleep against the door, past the middle one, reading a comic book, past the oldest one who had already learned not to say anything. Nobody asked him to stop. Nobody coughed in a pointed way. The radio played and the miles went by, and this was just what long drives smelled like. It wasn't an anomaly. It was every road trip, every school pickup on a cold morning when the windows stayed up, every drive home from church. The family doctor smoked in his office. The commercials on TV made it look like the healthy choice. There was no warning label on the pack that mentioned the children in the back seat. And there's this: many people who grew up in the 1970s will tell you that the smell of cigarette smoke still takes them back, not to harm, but to their father, to the front seat, to being young and going somewhere together. They weren't cruel. They were uninformed. And there's something almost sadder about that: love given freely, harm delivered unknowingly in the same breath. Letting kids have a sip of beer or a taste of wine. At Thanksgiving, someone always gave the kids a small pour. Maybe it was grandpa, maybe it was an uncle who thought it was funny, maybe it was dad. But the moment came at every holiday gathering where a child got to tip the glass and taste the thing the adults were having. The beer was bitter, and the face the kid made always got a laugh. That was part of the point. There was a theory behind it too, spoken out loud without embarrassment. Let them taste it young, and they won't be curious about it later. Whether that was true or not, the gesture felt like initiation, like being let in on something, like being trusted with a small adult secret at the crowded holiday table. For a boy, having a sip of his father's beer could feel like a rite, something passed between generations without ceremony, without words. It felt warm. It felt like belonging. Today, providing alcohol to a minor is a criminal charge in all 50 states. The memory is warm. The the mugshot would not be. Dosing kids with whatever medicine was in the cabinet. By today's standards, this reads like a list of things never to do. Back then, it was just Tuesday night parenting. When the baby was teething and screaming at 2 a.m, the answer was whiskey on the gums. Not a question, an answer, passed down from one generation of exhausted mothers to the next, practical and certain. When the child had a fever, the answer was aspirin, children's aspirin, the orange-flavored kind, which at the time nobody knew was linked to a rare and serious condition called Ray's syndrome. When the cough kept everyone up, there was cough syrup with codeine, available over the counter, suitable for a 3-year-old according to the dosage chart on the back. Nobody thought twice. The pediatrician had a similar cabinet. The advice came from grandmothers who had raised 6 children without incident, and that felt like evidence enough. The idea that a parent might be investigated for following their own mother's advice would have seemed absurd, almost insulting. They weren't medicating carelessly. They were doing exactly what their mothers taught them. The problem is, their mothers didn't know either. Never taking kids to the doctor unless something was visibly broken. There were no well child visits. There was no annual checkup penciled into the calendar. No pediatrician who expected to see your child every year just to see them. You went to the doctor when the child was sick, and not always then, not for a fever, not for an ear infection that might resolve on its own, not for a cough that had gone on too long but wasn't long enough to justify the expense and the time in the waiting room. The working assumption was that the body knew what to do, that children were resilient, that most things passed. Vaccines happened on schedule, mostly. The rest was managed at home with the remedies already discussed, and the judgment of a mother who had seen worse. If the child woke up and ate something and wasn't pale, the day proceeded. Preventive medicine as a concept, the idea that you should examine a healthy child to catch what isn't visible, yet was not yet woven into the fabric of ordinary family life. Today, missing a well child visit shows up in pediatric records as a gap. It can be flagged. They trusted the body the way they trusted the neighborhood, that things would mostly work themselves out. Sometimes they did. Sometimes the cost of that trust was paid later, in a doctor's office, years down the road. Talking about race, politics, and people without filtering it around kids. Dinner was where the adults talked, and the children were at the table, and nobody sent the children away first. The conversation went where it went, about the neighbors, about the news, about whatever was happening at work or at church or in the city. Opinions were stated plainly. Observations about people who were different in race, in background, in belief, were made without lowering the voice, without choosing words carefully, without stopping to consider what the 8-year-old was absorbing with his mashed potatoes. This was not malice. This was a kitchen table in 1973, and the adults were simply talking the way adults talked when they weren't being watched. But the children were always watching. Children are always watching. The things said casually at dinner became part of how those children understood the world before they had any framework to question it. Not through textbooks, not through curriculum, but through the voice of someone they trusted completely, in the warmest room of the house. Today, there are books, courses, and entire consulting practices devoted to how to speak to children about race and difference and the complexity of other people. Every generation passes something down at the dinner table. The question has always been, what exactly are we serving? They were ordinary people, doing what their parents taught them, in a world that hadn't yet written the rules we now take for granted. Some of what they did was genuinely dangerous. Some of it was just different. And some of it, if you're honest with yourself, you'd trade a piece of your carefully scheduled, GPS-tracked, screen time limited life to have back. The laws changed because the evidence mounted. The warnings came because people paid the price first. That's how it always works. But here's the thing no law can quite explain. Most of us who survived those back seats, those lawn darts, those parking lots and unlocked doors, we didn't grow up angry at our parents. We grew up knowing, somehow, that they were doing their best with what they had, which raises a question worth sitting with. What are we doing today, right now, with every safeguard in place, that our own children will look back on and say, I can't believe that was normal? The answer is out there. We just can't see it yet, because we never can until we can.